Okay, so this video is going to be kind of an attempt to document a process. It's a little complicated to explain, but this is the Matrix City Cars example project. And I wanted to be able to use these vehicles in other projects, which they say you can do. But these vehicles are extremely high. You can see there's 600,000 triangles in this one and 456 in this one. That's actually no wheels. This is the full one. So there's 500,000, and in some cases, like the bus, is like 3 million triangles, and that's way too much. And I wanted to be able to use set them up in a way that would make them smaller, obviously, which you can do with just the you can always take one of these, for instance, and just do the basic triangle percentage, which we're going to do in the end, at the end of the process. But rather than just taking this whole thing and doing that straight off, what we're going to try to do is a couple of things. So this is going to take a minute to explain, so you can skip ahead if you don't want to hear the explanation of in detail of what we're doing here. We want to take these and get them. There's a few goals here. Obviously, one is going to be to reduce the number of triangles by eliminating parts of the mesh, these meshes and these parts that are not needed or can't be seen. Depending on, we'll get into that, but depending on how much you want to do. And I usually get a pretty good reduction. On these vehicles, it's not a lot. It's maybe 20%. On things like the bus and the garbage truck and the semi, it was like half or more. I think in the case of the bus, it went from 3 million triangles down to 900-something thousand. So it's quite a reduction by getting rid of stuff you don't need. Now, my purposes, and this would depend on the purposes you want to do here. If we look at this mesh, this has all sorts of stuff in it as far as the detailing goes. And they really over-engineered, over-modeled these models severely. I mean, there's things, we'll get into it here in a minute. You'll see there's actually nuts and bolts, individual nuts and bolts, that are really not needed for most purposes. If you get up under here, you can see there's hoses and piping and some stuff you're just never going to see unless you get underneath the vehicle or up close. So for my purposes, and again, this depends on what you want to do, there's a lot of this stuff that I don't need. I want to be able to make these so that they will look good like this, or as a model sitting in the world, and also something I can create some kind of destroyed or distorted model for, in which case I do need the undercarriage to a degree, but I don't necessarily need all of this stuff. There are ways to optimize this and remove a lot of stuff that isn't really going to be seen. For my particular project that I'm working on with this, we're going to be at a distance of probably something like this at the closest. We're not really going to be up close on these. So I can get rid of quite a bit of stuff that is just not going to be seen. For instance, just to give you an example, that pin, this pin right here in the center, that pin isn't necessary. It's not a whole lot of polys and tries, but there's some modeling there. But there's a bunch of these kinds of things around in here that just don't need to be there for the distances we're talking about. I mean, if you were crawling around here, in a first-person game, you might see that, but even if you get outside of the car, you can't see that pin. And there's a whole bunch of stuff like that we can take out, or at least I can take out. And you can use whatever judgment you want as to how much you want to keep in that. And we'll get into that. I'll show you examples of what I take out and why. And I'm going to model these to the standard of what I'm trying to do. But the other goal here, and the really big one, is that we're going to work from the parts, the larger basic parts. We're going to do the shell, which I think is this one, or maybe this one here rather. And we're going to do the doors to each of the doors. We're going to take one wheel, and we're going to modify it. We're going to reduce the triangles on it and replicate it. Now, that's not such a big deal on this one, but if you use the same wheel, these should all use the same materials and such, but if you use the exact same wheel, you're going to get the exact same stuff replicated. And we want to try to be as efficient as possible in our final result of getting materials reduced as well, like to reuse the same material, the same textures and such like that. These probably do that anyway, but it's going to be a little easier just to make sure by taking one wheel and just replicating around, since really it's just the same wheel anyway. This becomes really strong kind of thing in terms of reduction when you talk about things like the garbage truck and the trailer and the semi, because they have like 6 or 8 wheels. And in many cases, again, depending on your application, for what I'm trying to do, you're not going to see the wheels on there, the inner part. They're like 2 wheels next to each other on each side. And you're not going to see the inner wheel. So I just eliminate that. I just don't put it in there. So right there I save, if these are 36,000 triangles, I save 36,000 polys times, 6 wheels or 4 wheels. Anyway, so there's things like that. But we're going to take this shell, this inner frame, and the wheels and the doors, a wheel and the doors. And we're going to cut them down individually and take out parts that are not needed. We're going to assemble that into a static mesh, a single static mesh, which will have all of the materials for all these parts on it. So there'll be like 30, 40 materials, about 30 materials. And then we're going to take that and we're going to use the merge actors to reduce that down to one material. So the goal again here is to get these models down to a single material so that when you eventually use them, you get one draw call instead of 30. And really 3 or 4 textures, or however many textures you want to use. I just use the normal, the base color, and the metallic, and it comes out looking pretty good. You can do more stuff if you want. I'm not going after, in some cases with these, again, they really over-engineered these, and the material instance that has to do with the paint, there's a lot you can do. There's imperfections, like you can see here. There's all sorts of scratches and other things you can enable. I'm not going to use that. I just want a clean, good-looking, maybe slightly metallic looking model, and that's all I'm looking to do. I don't want to, I'm not trying to recapture all of the little minutiae, and when you reduce down to one material, you really can't capture all that anyway. So what I've done for that, just as an aside, we'll get into a little bit more, is I've created material instances, materials, these are really not instances, I shouldn't say instances, but materials based off of the original materials that are a little simplified and have a lot of that stuff turned off already. So I just get the color, and we'll go into more of that later. But I created a whole set of these with different colors and such to give me a baseline to work from. And I can modify the colors from here or pick these or duplicate them or whatever. I ran them as separate materials because I don't want to change. I find it gets dangerous when you change the color, and if you want to go back to the color, you can't remember what you set it as. And sometimes you have to modify these colors to get things to come out right. You have to go darker or lighter. We'll get into that. So, but the other, and again, here's a little bit more of a what we're aiming for. If you do it right, and I've got a process that this generally works for, at least it worked on 2 of the vehicles I did, what you can end up doing is you'll end up with a model, mesh, as a final merged mesh, and a reduced material, okay? And then you can take that static mesh that you created as a combined static mesh, and you can change just the car paint. I haven't tried with the interiors, but I imagine this would work as well. But you can change just the car paint, because in this particular model it's pretty easy to do. There's specific slots for the car paint for the exterior. And you can then make another merge actor material, and you can use that same material on one mesh, whatever the initial mesh you make that you combine. That becomes very powerful, because now you could make 6 or 8 different color variations, or how many color variations you want, and you can then apply that material to just the single model. Now, under normal circumstances, you would say, well, that should be how it works anyway. And indeed, if you use this whole model, it will basically work that way. But what we're trying to do is take all these things, reduce the amount of polygons, reduce the amount of triangles. We're trying to combine materials to get one material. And through all of that process, it's not necessarily a given that you would then be able to change just the paint and run the process again to reduce the materials, to merge the materials, and end up with something that's compatible with the same mesh. So it can be, but it isn't always the case. And in this particular case, it's very tricky to do it that way, to get it to come out that way, because, well, we'll get into it, but what ends up happening is the combined model that you make for this thing with all the parts, the combined mesh that has the 30 material slots, when you make the color variation, you've got to match all of those same materials in each model. They have to go not necessarily in the same material slot number either, because they get moved around. We'll get into it. It's very complicated. But if you could match everything exactly, so all the materials are in the same places. So when I say that, I'm talking about, for instance, there's a material for, just to give you an example, this little triangle right here, piece. This is a piece, and it has its own material. This trim right here has a material. So things like that. So this piece will exist as a material slot over here somewhere. And between the 2 models, let's say you make 2 variations of this. In one place, it might be number 4. I don't know if I can actually find it here. But it might be like, well, here's a good one. Yeah, number 7. It might be one of these over here. It might be element 4. And in the other model, it might be element 5. So they have to be the same material for both of those, even if the slot is different. That's what I'm talking about. And if you get all of those lined up right, and it's tedious, but I have had it work, then again, you can use the same mesh with all the different materials you're going to create for the color variations. So it's a very tedious process. I don't know how much I'm going to break this up or how long I'm going to go. I'm definitely going to be doing time-lapse, and I won't be showing everything. I won't show you the edits for all of the things I cut out of the mesh. I'll just give you some examples and run through a few things to show the method and the reasoning and what it is I'm trying to do with my thing, and a couple tips and tricks of how to edit things out quicker and easier. Originally, I was editing things just with polygon editing, using the modeling with the tri-select, which you can do, but boy, that I found an easier way. And you can still use that, and there's other instances you can do for things like that. Again, if something is underneath something and in between, inside the model that will never be seen, you could take the try one and just cut the triangles out to save some.